I do want to introduce our next speakers, Daniel and David. Gundula, if you want to say a few words about them before they share their screen.
I'd be most happy to. Thank you. By the way, Ilinka, thank you for this very thoughtful reflection question. And maybe this is something that I could use as a segue to introducing Daniel and David, because Daniel and David very kindly contacted me a couple of years ago. I think this was because you kind of read on the social media about one of the publications that we put out, right? And then we got together and noticed that, even in the preparation for the Podinar that we had recorded together, Daniel and David, could you remind me when this was? When was it, like 2019, 20-ish, pandemic-wise? Definitely in the pandemic, right?
Yeah, 2020.
And we already noticed that in the time when we prepared that webinar, how well we resonated, right? And we've been in contact ever since. And you both have been supporting us also a couple of years ago in a spectacular talk that you both gave also at our Catherine Welch Symposium a while ago, right? And this was a very vivid session that a lot of people still raved about a couple of years ago. So yeah, I wanted to actually introduce you both by speaking of the influence that you both have, right? So like what you both noticed that in the audience about Daniel and David, they're always way too modest, but they actually founded I would say, transcontinental undertaking by the time when you both, I think, were still doing your PhDs, right? So it was still by the time when you were still doing your doctoral thesis, and you were recognizing that in the practice as a scientist, there is too much opportunity to both pursue but also discuss critical thinking questions with the community. And as instead of just not doing what a lot of people do, is like, well, the scientific enterprise has its problems and I'm getting depressed, you went to action. And that's in a foreign country, right? So like in a completely different environment, far away from where, speaking of, being out of our cultural homes, like many of us are, right? So actually, just looking at the audience, so at least half of the audience is a cultural export everywhere from where we are, right? And so you basically took initiative in a completely foreign environment of just saying, okay, we need to install here and then establish a platform for more critical thinking, right? And you did this on your own initiative with your own, of course, you're engineers, of course, as you have a bit of a better relationship to technology that many of us have in the life sciences, but definitely you basically took initiative and thought that, well, it's much better than to stay like just here around ourselves. We just go virtual and go with a platform that allows us to cross borders and time zones and basically essentially all kinds of barriers that we have on the globe. And you have been remind me how many podcasts and webinars you have been recording since we met. How many were it? It's quite a few.
About 100, yeah.
100, right? With a lot of people. You invited quite a few thought leaders, interesting people from the most different sectors, and had the most interesting conversations. So if you could maybe also in the chat box put a link to the recordings from your webinars, because I can only warmly recommend to everybody to listen to all of those wonderful podcast series that you have since then recorded and done a tremendous service to the scientific community. Yeah, so I wanted to hand it over to you guys, because it's always such a joy to see you both.
Thank you so much, Gundula.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and quickly share my screen. So do let me know if you can see it in just a second. Okay, can you see my screen, please?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gundula, for the kind introduction. And we actually want to say thank you again for inviting us and for being kind enough to respond to our email. A couple of years ago, our curiosity brought us to your paper, and we thought it was really interesting. It challenged us to actually ask more questions about what we are doing. And so thank you so much, and thank you again for nourishing our steps even up till now. So today we want to share our thoughts on how we are using Common Mic to influence leadership in science and also responsible communication. And as Dr. Gundula mentioned already, My name is David Owusi Mensah, and I'm going to do this with my co-host, Dr. Daniel Fifi Hagan. And yeah, so why? We had so many questions. I will spare you the history behind everything, but we were transitioning in our consulting company, which is based in Ghana. And there were a lot of questions that we had also looking at our background in academia and engineering. So in the space of sustainability, everyone could say sustainability is something. And there were so many greenwashing in the space. And we are like, okay, what really is sustainability? So if you go on our website, it's actually defining sustainability from individual perspectives. So how do we answer this question? And there's a lot of research that is being done already in the industry and also in academia, but then the communication was not going on well. If industry wants to start an initiative, they need to get a consultant. But why don't they get someone who is in academia to explain what they want to do or to explain the basics of the initiative? And it looks like academia, people in academia can really express themselves in presentations in schools and universities. But when they are called to have conversations with the industry, they keep saying things that the industry cannot really understand. So that was quite a difficult thing for us to understand. And we're like, so what is actually going on in academia? And that is actually helping people to think critically and to think outside the box and to get themselves ready for either to have better conversation with the industry or to sort of improve how postgraduates and even graduate students are able to move towards the next stage. So with these questions, we just picked up a mic without any expertise, and we had to learn thoroughly over the past 4 years on the job to learn how to do this better and efficiently.
Yes. So how do we go about this? How are we going about doing this? Well, at GLC, we believe in the power of stories. Stories have always been at the core of human societies, and great stories have the ability to inspire real change. And that's why we've created a platform where researchers and people in the industry as well share not just what they've accomplished, but who they are and how their experiences have shaped science and society, and how their personal journeys have influenced their lives and those around them. And we do this because we believe that stories connect people, stories inspire, and every story matters. And it's remarkable what we learn when we reflect on our lives and share our stories with others.
So maybe just to give you some a picture of how the transition and how we have approached these things that Daniel just explained. One of the main reasons one of the main channels for sharing stories was also through interdisciplinary conversations. And we created a platform where we could actually allow people to tell their stories. And you can see here, over the years, we have brought different people from different backgrounds to have conversations in sustainability, just sharing their stories on how they see sustainability from their own perspective. And currently, our numbers keep shooting over 100 episodes and counting. We have done episodes that have reached over 90 countries with thousands of monthly listeners. Talking to people from engineering background, researchers, having panel discussions, people in finance that at the beginning, we had no idea how to even communicate with them, looking at our background, politicians and entrepreneurs, people from social groups, and even people in the media. And it's been a very interesting journey so far.
At GLC, one of the things that we want to do is to push boundaries by doing things differently. And we want to see what we can learn, what new perspectives we can learn from this. Earlier on in our podcast journey, some of our feedback from our listeners revealed that many young people were struggling to connect the bridge, the gap between their academic lives and their life after school. And this prompted us to create episodes featuring panel discussions with both recent graduates who are making an impact in the society and students, those who are still in school, that have found ways to connect meaningfully with the world around them. And this is really because sustainability, as David has mentioned, isn't just about our environment. It also applies to how we navigate our own educational journeys in a sustainable way. So we've also engaged, and this is also based on feedback that we got from our listeners, we've engaged with individuals transitioning between academia and industry. This is really a problem now, and we've encouraged them to share their stories. In fact, one of our upcoming, very, very exciting upcoming episodes is called Overqualified but Underexperienced. And this is coming from a quote that our speaker got when he moved from academia to industry. He got that from his boss, that you are overqualified but underexperienced. And it's a scary thing to hear. But again, this addresses the common dilemma that PhD graduates, or maybe graduates in as a whole, face when they move between academia and industry. Now, another thing that we are also doing, as David mentioned, is that we realize that sustainability is a matrix of complex problems that require diverse solutions from multiple perspectives. And over time, we will come to realize, and we are already beginning to realize in the world, that sustainability extends beyond our immediate environment. It also includes space. And this is why we began conversations with organizations like the European Space Agency. And we are trying to understand how they are dealing with sustainability in space to really approach the solutions for the problem or the challenges within sustainability. And we invite you to stay tuned to these exciting episodes that are coming up.
So these and more, but what have we learned throughout this journey? It's really difficult to sort of summarize these in few slides, but it's really been an experience for us as hosts of the podcast. And sometimes when we listen over and over these conversations, it inspires us to also explore. And I think maybe we'll have another opportunity later, maybe in the coming years, to actually share how this has impacted us personally. But we want to summarize this in 3 main points that is also related to the concept of this conversation in this symposium, that we've learned the value of keeping values. We've learned things that sort of highlight leadership and also in communication. And maybe Daniel, you can take us a little bit deeper into this whilst we end this conversation.
Yeah. So one of our very first lessons is something that we are really excited about. We found that perhaps the 3 R's on which the RISE Center is built is probably preceded, or should probably be preceded, by something else, a certain value, which is, interestingly, love. And that might sound strange. It was also a strange discovery for us as well. But here is what it means. Love for truth and society around us will motivate a sort of a natural outflow of these 3 R's when the students are taught about it, when they are taught to begin to learn about the 3 R's. So here's an example. We can teach people to be responsible for their research and findings, but what happens when the systems that are in place to make them accountable fail? Well, it seems like it will then depend on that individual, on what their most fundamental values are. And if they indeed love the truth, then the hope is that they would still be committed to it, to communicating it rightly. In an age where graduate students, and I'm sure the students here will certainly identify with this, graduate students are consistently under pressure to deliver through publications. For instance, love for truth will become an important value. Are you really going to massage the data or something like that to get the paper out there? Or are you going to stick to it and then commit yourself to the truth? Secondly, our love for people will motivate us to make our research reproducible. This is what we are calling sharing in love. So really sharing is a reproducibility. That is a sharing in love. And it will help us to make our research reproducible so that others may share in our findings as well. And thirdly, love for truth can motivate us to pursue a deeper investigation into our research, which would certainly require critical thinking and also the desire to communicate rightly. However, we think that this value has to be learned at a younger age, because when we are older, we are generally set in our ways, right? And it becomes difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. Nonetheless, we also firmly believe that even at an older age, when people hear the right stories, it could make a difference in their lives to genuinely move them towards the 3 Rs. And we firmly believe this. Now, history has taught us that leaders who have great stories can really inspire. And actually, stories about leaders who have overcome adversities and struggles may even inspire more. A leader who has been through fire knows how to have compassion and truly connect with others and to guide them through their dark times. And this motivates people to follow such leaders. Such leaders will have a lot of people following them. And at GLC, we talk with a lot of leaders in science and industry. And through our conversations, we discover how the elements of the 3 Rs and love play phenomenal roles in their various establishments. And sometimes people who are not leaders, people who are not even leaders, discover through our discussions that they can become leaders of influence in science and industry through their stories. One of the last lessons that we've also learned is that, of course, this is a key snag which sparked up the Green Living Chats, is the need to communicate rightly and accessibly to anyone interested. So in our current world, we have the wonderful privilege of having access to a lot of information, and probably too much information, which was quite rare just about 30 years ago. And the problem now is, how do we navigate through all this information to find what is reliable and what really matters? So what we aim to do at GLC is to bring the right message in an accessible and relatable way to anyone who might be interested. And through this medium of scientific communication that we have, we want to challenge listeners to care about sustainability and to think critically about what they could do to solve related challenges. The truth is that all avenues of communication now have become very, very dynamic in our present world. And especially now that there is a growing preference for brevity, shorts, YouTube shorts and TikTok and others are becoming the preferred sort of mode of inspiration and communication and transfer of information. And in fact, our research has also shown us at GLC, our research has shown us that the first 15 minutes of our podcast episodes are the peak listening parts of the episodes. And this is a challenge for critical thinking because, arguments need to be well laid out to produce a deeper understanding. And it's becoming rare to just slow down and take time to think about what we have read or heard and to see how these would challenge our thoughts and our own philosophies. And scientific communication by the media now seems to be driven more by being the first to publish. If you're the first to publish, yay, people are happy about this. And this often compromises the integrity of the content. As such, experts are now made overnight, right? And this seems to be some kind of a hindrance to critical thinking. There is also a lot of pressure to indulge in mainstream biases, even in the sciences. There is that pressure as well. We have to use trendy words or only go into topics that are hot. And as such, novelty is difficult to sort of to come out from this situation. However, we find that the right conversations can help us to pause, think, identify gaps, and come up with novel solutions that will make a difference in the society and science.
So with all these examples, we get to know that communication is not just a straightforward thing, especially if we want to make an impact on the other end. And throughout this conversation and our practice at GLC, we realize that there are two main equipment we use when we are having conversations. So our headset and the mic. We need to listen to what the other person is saying at the other end. And we need to speak back by processing what we heard in the headphones and sort of speak back. So sometimes we send questions to our guests ahead of time, 10 questions normally, and they give us feedback. Oh yeah, the stories are okay, the questions are fine. Let's go ahead with it. But then during the conversation, we end up having maybe about 5 questions. But then in between these 5 questions, we realize that by listening and doing the hard work of practicing good communication, we are able to process and ask better questions based on what the feedback they gave to us and what we also realize that the transition of the conversation is going. So communication, a good one, is hard, but we are committed to it. And we are also happy to share your stories because your stories also do matter. Thank you again for inviting us.
Thank you.
Oh, what an outstanding presentation as always. I mean, it's really leadership live and in color, right? So like it shows really how leadership can be established out of personal initiatives based on values. I love the idea of love being among the values. I'm going to steal this right away and use this for my ethical teaching class because I think this is, love, especially also with in context of empathy, right? And also you mentioned the idea of somebody having gone through hardship or through fires, as you said, right? Makes one more compassionate. So maybe that's the way how we should act as teachers, as practitioners towards one another, and making sure that we are also, not only preaching what should be, but also having an understanding and a compassion for difficult situations and being rather supportive for the good practice and practice of science as well as science communication, rather than just telling others and telling at others what they should do, right? So that's always a good idea.